Marry her if that's what you want, Dad. But before the wedding, sign the house over to us. The accounts, too. The investments. All of it. My son said this to me across a table I had bought with overtime, over a bowl of stew I had spent the whole afternoon making, because it was the one thing he had loved since he was 6 years old. He said it the way a man reads a weather report. Then, before I could find any words that were not going to break something in the room permanently, the doorbell rang. It was 6:40 on a Tuesday evening in October, and nobody comes to my door at 6:40 on a Tuesday evening in October. I want to tell you what was inside that envelope and what it cost me to open it. But before I do, if stories about family, money, and the strange courage it takes to defend an ordinary life mean something to you, take a moment to subscribe to my channel and leave a comment when you're done. I read them, everyone. Sometimes a stranger's sentence has carried me further than my own. Now let me start where it actually started. That day had been gray in the way that autumn in Cedar Falls is gray, not dramatic, just tired. Wet leaves plastered to the driveway like paper someone had given up on. A cold ache in my right knee that had been keeping better track of the seasons than any calendar for about 15 years now. I had spent the afternoon making beef stew in the blue Dutch oven that Diane used to keep on the back burner, the one with the chip in the enamel near the handle that I have never had repaired and never will. Nathan had loved that stew as a boy. He used to pick the carrots out and line them along the rim of his bowl like little orange soldiers, and then eat them last, in order from left to right, as though there were rules to it. At 38, he still asked for seconds. I don't think he knew he did it. I think men carry their childhoods around like a coat they've forgotten they're wearing. I bought sourdough from the bakery near the courthouse square and an apple pie I fully intended to pretend I had made. Claire had helped me pick the wine, though she wasn't coming to dinner. I wanted to tell my son about the engagement alone. Father to son. That still meant something to me. It meant something enormous to me, actually, which is the part I would like you to remember later. Nathan's black SUV pulled in at 6:10. He left the headlights burning while Kristen read something on her phone in the passenger seat. Through the front window, I watched her lips move as she read it. Twice, whatever it was, she read it twice. I know now what it was. I didn't then. They came in with the cold on their coats. Nathan handed me a bottle of bourbon and called it an early Christmas present. It's October, I said. Then you've got time to practice. That was Nathan. A small joke whenever the air got heavier than he liked. He'd been doing it since he was 9, since the year his mother's hair started coming out in the shower drain. And nobody in our house could say a true sentence without it turning into something else. Kristen kissed my cheek and set her leather handbag on the dining chair Diane used to sit in. I noticed. Then I felt foolish for noticing. Diane had been gone 21 years. A chair can't belong to a dead woman forever. I know that. I have always known that. I have said it to myself in that exact phrasing more times than I can count. Still, when Kristen went to wash her hands, I moved the bag to the spare chair. And I did it quickly, the way you do something you'd rather not be caught doing. Dinner began easily enough. Nathan complained about the construction slowing the north side to a crawl. Kristen told me their oldest Owen had been given a speaking part in the school's Veterans Day program. I asked whether he needed help memorizing it. He's got it, Nathan said. Kid remembers everything. Must get that from his mother. Kristen laughed politely. In the living room, the television was muted, showing a weather map with a blue line falling through the middle of the state like a slow knife. The furnace clicked on. Steam came off the stew for a few minutes. And I want to be honest about this, because I've turned this evening over so many times since. For a few minutes, I sat in my own dining room with my son and my daughter-in-law, and I thought I had worried over nothing. Then I put down my spoon. I've got some news. Nathan looked up. You finally buying that fishing boat? No, you should. You've been talking about it for 10 years. I asked Claire to marry me. The room went quiet, not dramatically. Not the way silence works in films, where the music drops out and someone's glass shatters. It went quiet just enough that I could hear the refrigerator motor kick on in the kitchen, and I remember thinking that the refrigerator sounded very loud, and then thinking that I had lived in this house for 31 years and never once noticed the refrigerator before. Kristen looked at Nathan before she looked at me. I have replayed that half-second more than any other half-second of my life. She looked at him first. Not surprised. Surprise doesn't need permission. She was checking. checking whether the thing they had already prepared for had arrived. Nathan blinked once, then he smiled. Well, he said. Okay, congratulations, I waited. He reached across the table and shook my hand. My son shook my hand. It was the strangest thing that had happened to me in years, and it would hold that title for about 30 more minutes. When did this happen? Kristen asked. Saturday. We walked through Rosewood Gardens, had dinner over in Lakeview, and she said yes. She did? She did. That's wonderful, Kristen said. Her voice was warm, but her fingers had stopped moving around the stem of her wine glass, and they stayed stopped, and that stillness told me more than her voice did. I have unloaded freight for 38 years. You learn to read a body before it decides to tell you anything. Nathan leaned back. When's the wedding? Probably April. Small church ceremony. Nothing fancy. Have you two talked about a prenup? And there it was. Not congratulations. Not whether I was happy. Not where we might live, or whether Claire liked coffee in the morning, or whether I had been lonely. Nobody had asked me that in 21 years. And I want to be clear that I never blamed anyone for it, because I had gotten very good at looking like a man who wasn't. A prenup. We've started discussing it, I said. Kristen folded her napkin carefully into a smaller and smaller square. That's good. Second marriages can get complicated. I'm aware, especially with property, she continued, and retirement accounts, beneficiaries, long-term care. Nathan cleared his throat. What Kristen means is we just want you protected. From Claire? Nobody answered. I looked from one of them to the other. Claire Bennett had never asked me for a dime. On our first trip together, she insisted on paying for her own hotel room. And when I argued, she looked at me over the top of her reading glasses in a way that ended the argument. She owned her townhouse in Lakeview. She drove a 6-year-old hatchback with a hairline crack in the windshield she refused to fix, because, in her words, it hadn't spread yet. She had a school pension after 36 years, and she still clipped coupons. And once, I watched her put a jar of preserves back on the shelf because it had gone up 60 cents. What exactly are you worried about? I asked. Kristen's expression softened. It softened the way it does when she is talking to one of her children about why the dog had to go to the vet. No one thinks Claire is a bad person, but people change when money is involved. Which people? She paused. Nathan stepped in. Dad, you worked your whole life for what you have. Mom worked for it too. That landed harder than I think he intended. Or perhaps exactly as hard as he intended. I have never been able to decide, and I have had a long time to try. Diane had worked at a dental office for 14 years before she got sick. After she died, I worked nights, weekends, and every holiday shift the schedule would give me. I refinanced this house to keep Nathan in school. I skipped vacations for 11 consecutive years, so my son would not graduate owing anyone anything. When he crossed that stage, I stood up too fast and my knee gave, and I sat back down and I cried where nobody could see me. And I have never told him that, and I suppose I'm telling you instead. I did not need my son to remind me who had built my life. Kristen reached down beside her chair and pulled out a navy folder. She placed it on the table between the bread and the pie, and something in me went very cold and very quiet, because you do not bring a folder to your father's house. A folder is a thing you bring to a room where someone is going to lose. We spoke with someone about setting up a family trust, she said. Just as a precaution, I didn't touch it. Nathan opened it himself and slid several pages toward me. The words blurred at first, not because I couldn't read them, because some part of me was standing in the doorway of understanding and refusing to walk through. Draft instructions. Trustee. Nathan Whitmore. Property to be transferred, the residence. Brokerage accounts. Certificates of deposit. Other investment assets. Monthly distributions to be determined by the trustee. I looked up at my son. You want me to put you in charge of my money? That's not how I'd say it. It's written right here. In the words you'd say it in, if you'd written it. You'd still have access. Access. I have thought about that word more than any other word from that night. Access is what you give a contractor to a crawl space. Access is what a man has to a building he does not own. Nathan rubbed his forehead. Dad, come on. Don't make this ugly. I'm not the one who brought paperwork to dinner. Kristen spoke gently. You can still marry Claire. Nobody is trying to stop you. Nathan nodded. Marry her if that's what you want. But before the wedding, transfer the house, the accounts, and the investments into the trust. And you control it. For the family. I stared at him. That face had once been round and freckled and permanently sticky from something. I could still see him at 8 years old, asleep on the living room couch, with his baseball glove tucked under one arm, because he'd wanted to show me a catch he'd made and had refused to go to bed until I got home from a late shift. I carried him upstairs without waking him. He weighed nothing. His whole body went soft against my shoulder, the way children do when they trust you completely and unconsciously, which is the only kind of trust that is ever really pure. Now he sat across from me at the same table, calculating what I would be permitted to keep. "Have you already decided how long I'm supposed to live?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "That's not fair, no. What's not fair is that this feels less like estate planning and more like the two of you dividing up my life while I'm still sitting in it." "We're trying to protect the grandchildren," Kristen said. "From what? College debt? Or from the possibility that I might spend my own money before I have the decency to die?" Nathan pushed his chair back an inch. "You're twisting everything." "No, son. I'm finally hearing it clearly." He looked toward the hallway. "That is the detail that convicts him, if you want to know." Before it rang. He looked toward the hallway before it rang. Then the doorbell rang. Once. Then again. I stood slowly. My knees had stiffened from sitting in the cold draft that comes off that window every October, no matter how many times I've recalked it. Through the glass panel beside the door, I could see a man in a dark jacket holding a large envelope, standing back from the step at a polite professional distance, the way men stand when they have done this many times and would rather not be hit. "Mr. Gerald Whitmore?" "Yes. I'm here to serve you with documents from the Ashwood County Superior Court." I signed for it. I remember that my hand was steady, and I remember being distantly proud of that, the way you're proud of a car that starts in the cold. I carried the packet back to the dining room. Nathan had gone the color of the tablecloth. Kristen's hands were folded in her lap so tightly the knuckles had gone white, and she was looking at the pie. I opened the first page. Verify petition for appointment of guardian of the person and estate of an alleged incapacitated adult. My name beneath it, then my son's. And then I looked at the filing date. 6 days earlier. "You filed this last Wednesday," I said. Nathan swallowed. "Dad, we were hoping you'd cooperate." And the whole evening rearranged itself in front of me, the way a word you've been mispronouncing your entire life suddenly rearranges itself the first time you hear it said correctly. The folder on my table had not been a suggestion. The dinner had not been a conversation. The stew, the wine, Kristen's warm voice, my son's hand reaching across the table to shake mine, all of it had been the last, softest attempt to make me surrender voluntarily. A courtesy. The kind of courtesy you extend to a man before you do the thing you have already scheduled. "You filed this," I said, "before I even told you there was going to be a wedding." Nathan's eyes dropped to the table. "We knew you wouldn't listen." And that was the moment I understood. They had not come to save me from Claire Bennett. They had come to save my money from me. The process server had barely backed out of my driveway before Nathan stood up. "Dad, just read everything before you panic." I looked at him. "Panic? I know how this looks." "No," I said quietly. "I don't think you do." Kristen reached for her folder. "The petition doesn't mean anyone thinks you're incapable. It's simply asking the court to review the situation. You're asking a judge to decide whether I'm allowed to run my own life. We're asking for protection. For who?" Neither of them answered. The stew sat between us, cooling. The smell of onions and thyme filled the room. It is a smell I had associated for 30 years with warmth, with a house that had someone in it, and I found I could not imagine eating another bite. I have not made that stew the same way since. I still make it. It is just not the same recipe anymore, because I am not the same man who used to make it. Nathan finally spoke. "We didn't want it to come to this. Then why did you file it 6 days before sitting at my table?" His shoulders slumped. "We wanted to give you one last chance. One last chance to do what? To make the right decision." I let out a short laugh. It surprised me. It wasn't a laugh with anything in it. "You mean your decision?" Kristen looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Gerald, please don't think we're your enemies. My enemies probably wouldn't have waited until dessert." Nathan dragged both hands down his face. "You're making this sound ugly." "No, son, it already was. I'm just the last one to find out." Nobody spoke for a long moment. The weather map kept flashing silently across the television, that blue line still falling, indifferent, promising a cold that hadn't arrived yet. Finally, Nathan picked up his keys. "We'll let the lawyers explain everything." Then they left. I stood at the window and watched their SUV go down my street, and neither of them looked back, not once. And I stood there long after the taillights had turned the corner, holding a court summons in one hand and a dish towel in the other. I didn't sleep. The house got strangely loud, the way houses do when you're the only thing in them that's awake. The refrigerator hummed. The furnace clicked on every 20 minutes with the patience of something that has all night. Branches scraped the bedroom window whenever the wind came up, and each time I heard it I thought, absurdly, that someone was at the door again. Around 1:30 I gave up pretending. I carried the petition into the kitchen, made coffee that tasted like a punishment, and read every page. The language was polite, clinical, cold. It never once called me a bad man or a bad father. It was so much worse than that. It simply described me, carefully, in complete sentences, with citations, as a man whose judgment had become questionable. One paragraph noted that I had forgotten where I parked my truck after Owen's Little League game. That was true. It left out the part where I had parked 2 blocks away, because the lot was full, which is not a memory problem, that is a parking problem. And every human being in that town had one that day. Another paragraph said I had missed a dental appointment. Also true. I had written Thursday on the calendar instead of Wednesday. There was a section about the necklace I bought Claire for our anniversary, $2,100. The petition described it as an unusually extravagant purchase, inconsistent with Mr. Whitmore's prior financial habits. I almost laughed at that one. I had spent more than that repairing Nathan's transmission 3 years earlier, and nobody had filed anything about my judgment then. Apparently a man's mind is perfectly sound as long as he is spending his money on the right people. But the page that made me stop reading involved my doctor. At my annual physical, I had mentioned, in passing, the way you mention weather, that I'd been a little forgetful lately. I had also complained about sleeping badly after a change in my blood pressure medication. He adjusted the dosage. That was the entire event. It took 4 minutes, no dementia, no Alzheimer's, no cognitive diagnosis of any kind, nothing. And yet there it was on the page, rewritten in the language of decline, arranged so that a stranger reading it in a hurry would arrive at exactly the conclusion someone had paid to have him arrive at. I leaned back in my chair. The coffee had gone cold in my hands and I hadn't noticed, which I remember thinking was a thing I would now have to be careful about mentioning to anyone, ever again. And I understood something at that table, at 1:30 in the morning, that had never once occurred to me in 62 years. You do not have to be helpless to be made powerless. Sometimes all it takes is reading your own name in a paragraph written by someone who has already decided who you are. At 8 the next morning, I called Warren Sadler. I'd known Warren nearly 30 years. He'd handled Diane's estate. He'd walked me through the refinance the year after she died, sitting across from me while I signed my own house away by degrees to keep my son in school. And he had never once made me feel like a man who was losing. He answered on the second ring. "Morning, Gerald. I need help." His voice changed instantly. "What happened?" Nathan filed for guardianship. Silence, long enough that I heard him set something down. "Come to my office now." Warren's office looks out on the courthouse square. Same brick building he'd been in since the 80s. Same wooden shelves sagging in the middle. Same bowl of peppermints on the corner of the desk that I am fairly certain has been refilled but never emptied. He read the petition without interrupting. When he finished, he folded his glasses and set them on the page like a paperweight. "They're requesting guardianship over both your person and your estate." "What does that mean exactly? Say it plainly." "Plainly." He looked at me. "It means they want a judge to decide whether you are capable of making your own decisions. Not just financial ones. Where you live, what medical care you accept, who you're permitted to spend your time with." I sat with that. Can they actually do this? They can ask. He leaned forward, and asking isn't winning. That helped. More than he knew. The court doesn't expect a 62-year-old man to remember every appointment or never lose his keys, he said. It never has. Then why does this frighten me so much? Because it should. Warren has never once in 30 years sugarcoated anything, which is why I called him and not someone kinder. A guardianship petition is serious, but serious doesn't mean accurate. He tapped the page. The question is not whether you have ever forgotten something. The question is whether you understand your property, your finances, your relationships, and the consequences of your own decisions. I let out a breath I think I'd been holding since the doorbell. I do, I know you do. He paused. Now we have to prove it. Before I left, he gave me 3 instructions and held up a finger for each one, the way he has done since 1996. 1. Don't move money around because you're angry. I wasn't planning to. Good. 2. No emotional text messages. I smiled weakly. I've deleted 3 drafts already. That was the smartest thing you did this week. 3. He lowered his hand. Don't argue with your son. That may be the hardest one. I know it is, Warren said. But anything you say to him can become another exhibit. Right now, Gerald, every conversation you have with the people you love most is evidence. That's what they've done to you. That's the actual injury here, not the money. Claire came over that evening carrying chicken noodle soup in a container she had clearly meant to bring back empty. I figured you probably hadn't eaten. I had toast. At 4, she knew me too well to answer that. We sat on the back porch in light jackets while the sun went down behind the maples. I handed her the petition. She read every page, and she read slowly, the way a woman does who spent 36 years teaching children that words are not decorations. When she reached the section implying that she was manipulating me financially, her eyes filled. I am so sorry. You didn't write it, but I'm the reason they're doing this. No, yes. She looked down at the papers in her lap. If we weren't getting married, none of this would have happened. I reached for her hand. She pulled it away. Gently, but she pulled it away, and I felt that in my chest more than I had felt the summons. Maybe we should postpone everything, she said. I stared at her. For how long? I don't know. A year? And if they object again? She didn't answer. 2 years? Nothing. 5? Her eyes filled again. I don't want to be the reason you lose your son. The words hit me harder than anything on any page in that envelope. Because she meant them. Because she had already done the arithmetic and decided, quietly, alone, sometime between reading page 4 and page 9, that she was the part of my life that could be removed most cleanly. I got up and walked to the porch railing. Across the yard stood the oak that Diane and I planted the spring Nathan finished high school. It was a stick then. You could put your hand around it. It is now taller than the house, and I cannot get my arms around it, which is either a beautiful thing or a very cruel one, depending on what kind of evening you are having. For a moment I could almost hear Diane laughing somewhere behind me. Not literally. I want to be very careful about that, because I have read the paragraph that men my age get written about them. It was memory, the kind of memory that comes to you when you are lonely and standing outside in the dark. Before she died, near the end, when we had stopped being able to lie to each other, because there wasn't time for it, we talked about everything. Bills, Nathan, the house, and one afternoon out of nowhere she said, "Don't you spend the rest of your life sitting in an empty house on account of me." I promised her. Then I broke that promise for 21 years and I told myself it was grief, and it was, partly. But it was also easier. Grief is a very respectable place to hide. I turned back to Claire. This isn't your fault. She looked at me carefully. Are you sure? No. I smiled and it came out sad. It's mine. She frowned. I spent 21 years believing that every time Nathan struggled, my job was to make it stop. I looked down at my hands, big, cracked, permanently stained around the nails from a life of freight. Somewhere in there, I forgot that raising a man and rescuing one forever are 2 different jobs. I did the second one so well that he never had to learn the first one existed. Claire came over and took my hand. She didn't say anything. Neither of us spoke for a long while. Sometimes, silence tells the truth better than a speech does. And after 62 years, I had finally met someone who understood that. At nearly 9 that night, the phone rang. Warren. They've requested an emergency hearing. Already, they're asking for temporary authority over certain financial decisions until the court reviews the case. I close my eyes. What do I do? You keep living exactly the way you've been living. Don't perform competence. Just be a man with a life. And Nathan? Warren didn't hesitate. From this moment forward, assume every word you say to him could be read aloud in a courtroom. After we hung up, I stood alone on the porch. The lights from inside the house lay across the grass in soft yellow rectangles. It looked like a home. It looked exactly like a home, and I realized something I had not expected to realize at 62. I was not afraid of getting old. I was afraid that the people I loved most had already met and voted and decided that I was no longer allowed to choose how to spend the years I had left. The following Monday, I sat in a small medical office over in Lakeview, answering questions I had never imagined I would have to answer. What year is it? I told her. Who's the current governor? I told her that too, without hesitating, and then I felt ashamed for how badly I had wanted to answer quickly. Can you tell me what medications you take? I listed them one at a time. Blood pressure, cholesterol, vitamin D. An anti-inflammatory for the knees that has been quietly failing me since roughly 2019. Then came the questions that felt less like medicine and more like a stranger with a clipboard, measuring whether I still qualified as an adult. If someone offered to buy your house tomorrow for half its value, what would you do? I'd ask them to leave. She smiled slightly. What would happen if you married without discussing property first? I'd probably spend a few uncomfortable evenings in Warren Sadler's office. Another smile. By the time it ended, nearly 2 hours had gone by. She shook my hand and thanked me for my patience, and she said it kindly, and I believe she meant it. I climbed into my truck, shut the door, and sat there for almost 5 minutes without turning the key. I wasn't relieved. I was exhausted, in a way I had not been exhausted since the year Diane was dying. It wasn't the questions. It was understanding, finally, how easily the ordinary residue of a life, a forgotten set of keys, a miswritten date, a necklace bought for a woman who makes you laugh, can be gathered up by someone with a motive and arranged into a story about a man losing his mind. Growing older stopped frightening me that afternoon. What frightened me was how quickly someone else could pick up the pen. 3 days later, I sat across from Warren again. His conference table had disappeared under bankers' boxes. "They've built a story about you," he said, sliding a legal pad toward me. "So let's build the true one." "How?" "We're going to list every time you financially helped your son." I frowned. "All of them? All of them. That'll take all day." Warren gave me a dry look. I canceled my afternoon. We started with the easy ones, the down payment on Nathan's first house, then the business loan. Then 6 months of his mortgage, when the business folded and he sat in my kitchen at 31 years old with his head in his hands, and I told him not to worry. And I meant it, and I wrote the check before he'd finished the sentence. Then Owen's preschool tuition, then the hospital bills after the second baby, then a tax bill, then a transmission, then another transmission. The list kept going. Every time I dredged up another check, another wire, another quiet Sunday emergency, Warren added another line without comment. He never once looked up. I have thought since that he didn't look up on purpose. Around lunchtime, he leaned back and rolled his shoulders. "You know what's interesting?" "What?" "You never once asked him for anything in return." "I was his father." "Yes." Warren looked at me then. "And somewhere along the way, he stopped feeling like your son and started behaving like your client." That sentence has stayed with me for the rest of my life. It hurt. It hurt mostly because it was not wrong. By late afternoon, we had finished. Warren ran the total twice because he thought he'd made an error. $468,230. I looked at that number for a long time. I honestly didn't think it was that much. "Most parents don't," Warren said. "That's rather the point. You never added it up because adding it up would have meant it was a debt, and you never wanted it to be a debt." I laughed softly. "Funny thing is, I don't regret helping him. I know. I regret teaching him that help would always come." Warren closed the folder. "That difference is the entire case." Claire arrived just before 5, carrying a folder of her own. "This one's mine," she said, and put it on the table. Inside were documents I had never asked to see and would never have asked to see. Retirement statements, property records, insurance. A draft prenuptial agreement she had already had drawn up. Warren went through it carefully, page by page. Then he looked up at me over his glasses. "Gerald, did you know Claire owns her townhouse outright?" "No." Claire shrugged. "Paid it off 4 years ago. And the pension? 36 years with the district." Warren nodded slowly. "This changes the picture considerably." Claire shook her head. "I don't want it to. I know you don't." "It does anyway." He folded the prenuptial agreement closed. "Understand what this does and doesn't do. It doesn't prove you aren't influencing him." Claire looked disappointed. "But it proves something nearly as useful." "What?" "That you don't need his money. And a judge who has sat through 900 of these will notice the difference." Claire turned to me. "I never wanted your money, I know. I wanted somebody to complain about my knees with." That made me laugh out loud, in a lawyer's conference room, surrounded by boxes documenting the disintegration of my family. "And someone who likes old movies," she added. "I do like old movies." "And someone who doesn't think eating dinner at 4:30 is strange." "It isn't strange. See." For the first time in nearly a week, the three of us laughed. Just for a moment. It was one of the best moments of that entire autumn, and it happened in the worst room I had ever sat in. That Friday, Nathan called. "Dad, hello, how are you? Tired?" He hesitated. "Kristen and I were wondering if you'd meet with us." "Why?" "So we can work something out." I almost said no. Then I remembered Warren's finger going up. "Don't argue. Let them talk." "Where?" "Our attorney's office." I agreed. Their attorney's office was in a newer building on the edge of town. Bright lobby. Fresh coffee in a glass carafe. Too much glass generally, the kind of building designed so that everyone inside can be seen and nobody inside can be heard. Kristen greeted me as though nothing unusual had occurred between us. "Thanks for coming." Nathan wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Their attorney spoke first. "We believe there's still an opportunity for this family to avoid unnecessary litigation." I nodded. "Go on." He opened a folder. "We've revised our proposal." Kristen smiled hopefully. "If you establish the trust now, Nathan can serve as trustee." "What changes?" "You keep living in your house," she said. For now, the attorney continued. "You'd receive regular distributions for your living expenses." "Who decides the amount?" Nathan answered. "We would." "Based on what?" "We looked at your monthly spending." And he slid a spreadsheet across the table. Groceries, utilities, fuel, church donations. Dining out. Everything. Somebody had gone through my life line by line and calculated how much of my own money a man like me ought to be permitted to spend in a month. I stared at that page for a long time. "You've budgeted my life. We're trying to simplify things," Kristen said softly. "For who?" "For everyone." I looked down again, and near the bottom of the second page there was a section labeled Future Housing Obligations. And under it one line, Estimated Sale Value, Cedar Falls Residence. I looked up. "You've already discussed selling my house." "No," Kristen said. "Too fast. Far too fast." I tapped the paper. "Then why is there an estimated sale price on it?" She blinked. "That was just preliminary planning." "Planning for what?" "In case you eventually wanted something smaller." "I have never said I wanted something smaller." Nathan jumped in. "We're just thinking ahead." I closed the folder slowly and set my hand flat on top of it. "You've been thinking ahead a great deal." Nobody answered. The meeting ended politely, almost awkwardly. Nobody raised a voice. Nobody stormed out. That is the thing people don't understand about this kind of betrayal. It is never loud. It has excellent manners. It says thank you for coming and walks you to the elevator. In the parking lot, Warren caught up with me. "Well," he smiled without any humor in it. "I think your daughter-in-law just made a mistake." "What mistake?" She admitted, in front of witnesses, that she had already begun planning for a life in which you no longer controlled your own property. He unlocked his car. Judges notice a great many things, Gerald. But more than anything else, they notice timing. The next morning, Warren called before 8. Their amended petition just came through. What now? They're asking the court to temporarily restrict major financial transactions. Why? They claim you're likely to move assets before the wedding. I laughed once, not because anything was funny. Because I had finally completely understood. This had never been about whether I could manage my money. It was about making certain I could not manage it without their permission. "Gerald?" Warren's voice stayed level. "Are you all right? They've stopped pretending it's about my health." "Yes," he said. "They have." I stood at my kitchen window looking at the backyard, where the leaves had gone from a nuisance to a blanket. And for the first time since the doorbell rang, I was no longer wondering whether my son had betrayed me. I knew he had. The only question left was whether a stranger in a black robe would be able to see it too. The hearing was set for 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning. I arrived at the Ashwood County Judicial Center 45 minutes early. That is not nerves. That is 38 years of freight. If you are not 15 minutes early, you are already late, and I have never in my life been able to unlearn it. Warren was already there on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, with a legal pad balanced on his knee. "You sleep at all?" "A little. That's more than most people manage." He handed me a paper cup. "It's terrible." I took a sip. "It is, but it's hot." That's about the kindest thing anyone has ever said about courthouse coffee. We both smiled. It helped, not because it was funny, but because for 10 seconds I was a normal man drinking bad coffee with an old friend, instead of a case number. A few minutes later, Claire arrived. Navy dress, light gray coat. Nothing expensive, nothing that would photograph well, which I understood later was a decision she had made on purpose, and never mentioned to me. She sat down beside me and slid her hand into mine without a word. Her hand was cold, mine was too. Across the hall, Nathan and Kristen came in with their attorney. Nathan looked at me, then away. Immediately, Kristen gave me a small, polite nod, the kind you give a colleague in an elevator. And I remember thinking that we looked like people waiting for a zoning meeting, rather than a family waiting to find out whether I was still trusted to run my own life. Guardianship docket, the bailiff called. The courtroom was not large, a few rows of wooden benches worn smooth in the middle. 2 flags, a judge's bench polished by decades of hands, no reporters, no cameras, no audience, just 3 or 4 families carrying private catastrophes into a public room and waiting their turn. That is the part nobody tells you. This happens every single Thursday in every county in this country. Quietly, Judge Patricia Colson came in exactly on time. We stood. After a few routine matters, our case was called. Their attorney went first, and I'll give him this. He was good. He was calm and respectful, and he never once raised his voice or said an unkind word about me. No one is accusing Mr. Whitmore of being a bad man, he said. This petition is intended only to ensure he remains protected during a period of significant life changes. Then he laid them out. The upcoming marriage, the expensive necklace, the missed dental appointment, the medication adjustment, the forgotten truck. Each one alone was nothing, a Tuesday. Together, arranged in a row and spoken aloud in a courtroom by a man in a good suit, they became a pattern. Listening to a stranger summarize, your life is a peculiar kind of violence. Every ordinary mistake you have ever made comes back, wearing a suit and testifying against you. Then Warren stood. He didn't pace, he didn't raise his voice. He walked to the lectern with his hands empty and said, Your Honor, growing older does not make a person incapable. It makes a person older. Then he submitted the independent cognitive evaluation. The judge read it. Several minutes of silence, which in a courtroom is an extremely long time. Then she looked up. Mr. Whitmore, please come forward. I walked to the stand. My knee complained the entire way, and I let it. After I was sworn in, she asked the first question herself. Mr. Whitmore, can you describe your current sources of income? I explained. The pension from 38 years with the freight company, my retirement investments, Social Security, a small consulting job I still take occasionally from an old logistics outfit that calls me when their routing goes sideways. And who manages those funds? I do. Have you asked Ms. Bennett to manage your finances? No. Has she asked to? Never. Their attorney approached. Mr. Whitmore, did you purchase a necklace worth approximately $2,100 for Ms. Bennett? I did. Why? Because I loved her. A few people in the room smiled. Somewhere behind me I heard Claire's breath catch. Would you agree that was considerably more expensive than gifts you've purchased in the past? Yes. Why the change? I shrugged. Because I'm 62. He frowned slightly. He hadn't expected that, and I could see him deciding whether to leave it alone. He didn't. Could you explain what you mean by that? I looked at him, and then, because he had asked, I told a courtroom full of strangers the truest thing I had said out loud in 21 years. I spent 21 years putting everybody else first. I buried my wife and raised my son, and paid for a life I mostly watched other people live. And then, at 62, I met a woman who laughs at 4:30 in the afternoon over a plate of eggs. And I bought her a necklace. I paused. If a man is only permitted to be extravagant while he's young enough not to understand what it's for, then I don't know what any of us are saving it for. The room went very quiet. The attorney changed direction. You've forgotten appointments. Yes. You've misplaced your truck keys. Yes. You became confused after a change in medication for about 30 minutes. So you admit that memory problems exist. No. I looked directly at him. I admit that I'm getting older. And then because I am my father's son and I have never once left well enough alone. If forgetting where I parked one afternoon means a man loses the right to make his own decisions, then half the people at the grocery store ought to be standing here beside me. A few quiet chuckles moved through the room. Even Judge Colson allowed herself something that was almost a smile for about a quarter of a second before she put it away. Then Warren stood for his questions. Mr. Whitmore, why did you agree to a prenuptial agreement? Because Claire suggested it. Why? So my property stays mine and hers stays hers. Did she ask for ownership of your home? No. Any investment account? No. Any retirement funds? No. Warren held up the signed draft. This agreement specifically states that each party waives any claim to the other's premarital property. The judge read it carefully. Their attorney objected that the agreement hadn't been finalized. "Correct, Your Honor," Warren said without missing a beat. "We offer it only to demonstrate Mr. Whitmore's intentions and Ms. Bennett's lack of financial motive." The judge allowed it, and then came the part I had been dreading most. Warren set a thick binder on the evidence table. "Your Honor, this court has heard repeated suggestions that Mr. Whitmore is vulnerable to financial exploitation." He opened it. "I'd like to discuss a different financial relationship." He put a spreadsheet on the courtroom monitor. One line at a time. March 2010. Down payment assistance, $38,000. June 2014. Business loan, $67,000. Mortgage assistance, vehicle repairs, medical bills, tax payments, education expenses. The list went on and on, each entry with its own supporting exhibit, bank records, canceled checks, emails in my son's own words asking, thanking, promising. And then the total appeared at the bottom of the screen. $468,230. I couldn't look at the monitor. I looked at my hands. Warren turned toward Nathan. "Did your father voluntarily provide these funds?" Nathan answered very quietly, "Yes." "Did you promise repayment on several occasions?" "Yes." "Did you repay most of these amounts?" Nathan swallowed. "No, no further questions." But Judge Colson was not interested in shaming my son. "I have thought about that a great deal since, and I have come to believe it is the reason I trust her." She simply leaned forward. "Mr. Whitmore," she meant Nathan, "when did you first ask your father to transfer his property into a trust under your control?" Nathan hesitated. "A few days before the dinner." "And when was this petition filed?" He looked toward his attorney. The judge repeated the question, exactly in the same tone. "When was this petition filed?" "6 days before the dinner," Nathan said. The courtroom went completely still. Judge Colson folded her hands. "So before ever discussing this with your father, you had already filed a petition asking this court to appoint a guardian over him?" "Yes." "Did any physician diagnose your father with dementia?" "No." "With Alzheimer's disease?" "No." "With any condition preventing him from understanding his own finances?" "No." She looked down at the petition, then back up. "Has Mr. Whitmore failed to pay his taxes?" "No." "Lost significant money through fraud or a scam?" "No." "Failed to understand the nature of his property?" "No." She looked directly at my son. "Then what exactly changed?" Nathan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. And I sat there and watched my son fail to answer a question that had a very simple answer, an answer everyone in that room already knew, an answer he could not say out loud, because saying it out loud would have meant hearing it himself. Nothing had changed, except that I had stopped being alone. Warren called one final witness, a local realtor. She testified plainly and without any apparent enjoyment that Kristen had contacted her several weeks earlier requesting an estimated market value for my house. Kristen explained at once that it had only been preliminary planning. And the judge accepted that, without criticism. She nodded and wrote something down, and I remember feeling my stomach drop, thinking that the moment had passed and it hadn't been enough. Then Judge Colson asked one more question. "Mrs. Whitmore, had your father-in-law ever told you he wished to sell that home?" Kristen lowered her eyes. "No." "Then why begin discussing its value before he had made that decision?" Kristen didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence did it for her. In my experience, the truth almost never arrives as a confession. It arrives as a pause that goes on 2 seconds too long. Judge Colson recessed for 20 minutes. They were the longest 20 minutes of my life, and I have sat in a hospital corridor waiting to be told my wife was dead, so I do not say that lightly. I understood, standing in that hallway with cold coffee and Claire's hand in mine, that the two experiences were made of the same material. Both were about waiting to hear whether the life you had was still yours. When she returned, she spoke calmly, without ceremony, the way you'd read a grocery list. "The court finds insufficient evidence that Mr. Gerald Whitmore lacks the capacity to manage his personal or financial affairs." A pause. "The request for temporary guardianship is denied." Another pause. "The petition is dismissed." I closed my eyes. Not because I had won, because for the first time in 5 weeks I could breathe all the way in. Outside the courtroom, Nathan caught up with me before I reached the elevator. "Dad," I turned. "We were scared," he said. I looked at him for several seconds. He looked younger than he had at that dinner table. He looked, in fact, almost exactly like a boy who had broken something and was hoping the size of his apology would be accepted in place of the size of the damage. You were scared, I said quietly, that I might spend my own money. His shoulders dropped. And you never once stopped to wonder, I went on, whether in treating me like a man who couldn't be trusted with his own life, you might actually lose your father. He tried to speak. I raised my hand gently. I want that on the record. I raised it gently. Not today. Claire slipped her arm through mine, and together we walked out through the courthouse doors. The November air was colder than it had been when we went in. I have never felt lighter. The wedding was supposed to happen the week after the hearing. Instead, we postponed it 6 weeks. Not because either of us had changed our minds. Because I needed time to remember that my life still belonged to me, and because I did not want to marry that woman while I was still, in some private chamber of myself, a defendant. For almost a month, every time the phone rang, my chest tightened. Every trip to the mailbox was a small act of courage. I had never imagined that defending my right to remarry would leave me more tired than 38 years of loading trucks before sunrise. Claire never pushed. Some evenings she'd stop by with soup. Other days we walked the Millbrook Trail without talking much at all. That silence was different now, comfortable, earned. One Saturday she looked over at me and smiled. You know what's funny? What? You still apologize every time your knee slows you down. I do? You've apologized 3 times on this walk. I laughed. Well, you've had to wait for me. She squeezed my arm. Gerald, I'm planning to grow old with you. She glanced down at my leg. I am not expecting a marathon. For the first time in weeks, I laughed without having to decide to. We married on a cool December afternoon in a small church in Lakeview. Nothing extravagant. About 30 guests. Warren came with his wife. A few retired men from the freight yard who had not seen me in a suit since Diane's funeral and said so loudly more than once. Claire's sister brought homemade cookies for the reception. Instead of a ballroom, we used the fellowship hall. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, a white cake with plain buttercream. No DJ, just a playlist of old songs coming through the church speakers, slightly too quiet, which nobody fixed. Halfway through dinner, Claire leaned close. You know something? What? This is exactly the wedding I hoped for. I looked around the room. People talking. Coffee brewing in the kitchen. Somebody laughing too loudly near the dessert table. Nobody in that hall cared about property. Nobody was calculating anything. For a few hours we were simply 2 older people beginning another chapter, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the whole thing. Nathan wasn't there. I thought about him several times that day. More than once I reached for my phone. More than once I put it back in my pocket. Love doesn't disappear because someone hurts you. But forgiveness doesn't run on a schedule either. And anyone who tells you otherwise has never had to do it. The following week, Warren called me back to his office. One last piece of business, my estate plan. This time I wasn't reacting out of anger. That mattered enormously. I have watched a great many people ruin their families with a pen while their hands were still shaking, and I did not intend to be one of them. Warren spread the documents across the conference table. What do you want your estate to accomplish? The question surprised me. Not who gets what do you want it to accomplish? I thought about it for a long time. I want Claire protected if I go first. He made a note. I want my grandchildren to have opportunities. Another note. But I don't want money to become another reason someone stops taking responsibility for their own life. Warren looked up. So what are you thinking? I don't want Nathan managing anything. That can be arranged. I don't want Claire ever worrying about where she'll live. We'll give her the right to remain in the house for the rest of her life, if she chooses. I nodded, and after that the house can be sold. And the proceeds? I smiled. A trust for the grandkids. Warren raised an eyebrow. With conditions. Education, medical needs, a first home someday. I paused, but nobody, including my son, gets to treat it like an ATM. Warren smiled. I like that, so do I. When it was finished, I signed, and not once, not for a single stroke of the pen, did I feel like a man punishing his son. I felt like a man finally drawing lines he should have drawn 20 years earlier. But the hardest boundary wasn't the will. The hardest boundary was my own habits. About 6 weeks later, Nathan called. Dad. His voice sounded smaller. My transmission went out. For 21 years, I knew exactly what came next. I'd ask how much. He'd apologize. I'd write a check. That was the liturgy. We both knew our parts. Instead, I asked, have you gotten an estimate? About 3,200. That's rough. Silence. Yeah, he said. More silence. It stretched out. I let it. Do you know how difficult that is? To sit in a silence you have the power to end and not end it. Finally, can you loan me the money? I closed my eyes. Every instinct I have, every instinct built up over 2 decades of being the only wall between my son and the world, stood up in my chest and shouted at me to fix it. Make it go away. That was the whole architecture of my life. That was the thing I was for. I took a slow breath. I can't do that. He didn't answer. I'll drive you to work until it's repaired if you need me to. Nothing. I'll help you compare shops. I'll come look at it with you. Nothing. But I'm not paying for it. A long pause, then softly, I understand. We hung up. I sat in my recliner staring at a dark television for a long time. It felt terrible, and strangely it also felt right. Those two things can live in the same chest at the same time. Nobody warns you about that. Everyone tells you that doing the right thing feels good. Sometimes doing the right thing feels exactly like being a bad father, and you have to do it anyway, and you have to keep doing it. And there is no applause. And there is no moment when someone comes and tells you that you got it right. Almost 4 months after the hearing, I was replacing a broken fence board behind the house when I heard a vehicle pull into the driveway. Nathan climbed out carrying a toolbox. I hadn't asked him to come. He walked into the backyard and stopped a few feet away, the way a man stops at the edge of a property he isn't sure he's allowed on anymore. You still use that old hammer? It still works. He nodded. So does this one. He held up his own, the one I gave him when he turned 16, which I had assumed for 2 decades was in a landfill somewhere. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Finally, he said, I figured you could use another pair of hands. We spent nearly 3 hours replacing fence boards, mostly in silence. Occasionally talking about measurements, the weather, football, nothing important. Everything important. There is a kind of conversation men of my generation were never taught how to have. So we invented a substitute. We stand next to each other and fix something. The fence was never the point. The fence has never once been the point. When we finished, I looked at the straight line of fresh cedar against the old gray. Looks better. Nathan nodded. Yeah, he started packing his tools. Then stopped. Dad, yes, I've been seeing a counselor. I looked at him. She asked me something last week. What? She asked why I kept calling your money our future. He swallowed hard. I didn't know how to answer that. I waited. It cost me something to wait. 21 years of instinct wanted to answer it for him, the way I had answered everything for him. She finally said something I'll probably remember the rest of my life. What was it? She said an inheritance is a gift, not a retirement plan. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then Nathan looked at the ground. I honestly convinced myself I was protecting Mom's legacy. I shook my head. Gently. Your mother never called it her money. He frowned. She always called it ours. I stepped closer. And after she was gone, it stopped being money at all. It became the life I kept building, one shift at a time, because building it was the only way I knew how to keep loving her. His eyes filled. I'm sorry, no excuses this time. No blaming Kristen, no blaming fear, no explaining. Just 2 words arriving alone without any furniture around them. I believed he meant them. Did that erase what happened? No. Trust doesn't grow back overnight, and it doesn't grow back on demand. And anyone who has told you that forgiveness is a decision has only ever had to forgive small things. But for the first time in months, when I looked at him, I saw my son, instead of the man who had sat across from me at that table with a folder. I turned toward the house. You hungry? He looked up, surprised. I've got leftover stew. A slow smile spread across his face. I haven't had your stew in years, I know. Inside, I warmed 2 bowls while bread toasted in the oven. We didn't talk about court or guardianship or money. Not that afternoon. Some conversations deserve more than one meal. Some wounds heal one quiet Saturday at a time. He picked the carrots out, 38 years old, lined them up on the rim of the bowl, ate them last, left to right. I didn't say anything about it. I just watched my boy do the thing he has done since he was 6 years old, in a kitchen his mother chose the paint for. And I thought, there he is. Here is what I have learned, and I offer it to you not as a man who is proud of it, but as a man who paid a great deal for it and would rather you didn't have to. I thought this story was about money. It isn't. Money was only the language the argument happened to be conducted in. Underneath it, the argument was about something far older and far more dangerous. Who gets to decide that a person's life is over before that person has finished living it? We do this quietly in this country. We do it with kindness in our voices. We take an aging parent's forgotten keys and their missed appointment and their unexpected happiness, and we assemble these into a case. And the terrible thing, the thing I need you to understand, is that we very often do it out of love. Nathan loved me, I believe that. He loved me the way you love an old house you have inherited, with genuine affection, and a quiet certainty that you know better than the house does what should be done with it. And I made him that way. That is the part I cannot put down. Every rescue was a lesson. Every check I wrote said, in a language deeper than words, "You are not able, and I am," and that is the arrangement between us. I taught my son for 21 years that my resources were the solution to his problems. Then I was astonished when, at 38, he came to a conclusion I had spent his whole life teaching him. Love without boundaries is not love at a higher volume. It is something else wearing love's coat. It rescues a man so thoroughly that it never lets him become one. So if you are somewhere in this story right now, and after everything, I suspect a great many of you are, let me say the things I wish somebody had said to me when I was 45, and still believed that fixing was the same thing as fathering. You are allowed to spend your own money. That sentence should not need to be said out loud, and yet I have watched grown men and women weep in a lawyer's office, because nobody had ever said it to them. You are allowed to fall in love again. Grief is not a life sentence, and the dead, the real dead, the ones who actually loved you, never asked you to serve one. Diane told me so herself, plainly, while she still had the breath to do it, and I ignored her for 21 years and called it devotion. You are allowed to say no to your own child. Not because you have stopped loving him, because you haven't. Because the only inheritance that is truly worth anything is the discovery that he can carry his own weight. And he cannot make that discovery while you are carrying it for him. And you are allowed to be old and still be the author of your own life. Getting older is not a diagnosis. Forgetting where you parked is not a symptom. A necklace is not evidence. And the day someone begins collecting your ordinary human moments into a folder, understand clearly what is happening. They have not stopped seeing you as capable. They have stopped seeing you. Claire says our marriage didn't begin on our wedding day. She says it began the afternoon I stopped apologizing for wanting a life of my own. I'm 63 now. My knee is worse. The oak in the backyard is taller than the house. Nathan comes by most Saturdays, and we fix things, and we say almost nothing, and it is slowly becoming a friendship rather than a debt. And every October, when the leaves stick to the driveway and the furnace clicks on for the first time, I make that stew. I make it for myself now first, and then for whoever comes. That's the whole difference. That's everything I have to teach you. If any of this found you where you're standing, if you have ever struggled to hold love and boundaries in the same hand, or if you are a parent who has just realized what you've been teaching, or a son or daughter who recognized yourself somewhere in this and didn't enjoy it, I hope you'll subscribe to my channel and leave a comment. Tell me your version. Tell me what you're carrying or what you finally put down. Somebody scrolling past at 2 in the morning may need your sentence more than they need mine. And if you know someone who is sitting in an empty house because they made a promise to a person who never asked them to keep it, please send them this. Sometimes protecting your peace is the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved, even when it doesn't feel that way at first. Especially then. This story is written by a human being, not generated by a machine. The names, the town, and certain details have been changed to protect real people who did not consent to being recognized. But the beef stew is real, and the oak tree is real, and the 20 minutes outside that courtroom were the longest of my life. I've told it here in my own words because I believe some things should only ever be told in a human voice, with the pauses left in, and the parts that still hurt left in, and no one pretending to have understood it faster than they actually did. Thank you for listening.